Today's episode of Maine Web News is brought to you by Computer Improvements. Visit them at 101 Water Street in Skowhegan or call 474-3151 for all of your computer needs. That's 474-3151. There was a hearing in Augusta Tuesday on LD 34, an act to require candidates for public office to provide proof of citizenship.
I am State Representative Rich Sieber. I represent the 101st District, the lovely towns of Casco, Naples, and Poland in the House, and I am the sponsor of LD number 34, an act to require candidates for public office to provide proof of citizenship. What this bill would do, did Representative Weaver, did he read the summary of the bill? Okay. I have a very brief testimony on this bill, and I refer to the good book, the Constitution of the State of Maine. And I would just like to read to you Article 4, Section 4. No person shall be a member of the House of Representatives unless that person shall, at the commencement of the period for which the person is elected, have been a citizen of the United States, have arrived at the age of 21 years, and have been a resident in this state for 1 year. And it goes on. I'd also like to turn to the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 2. No person shall be a representative who shall not have attained the age of 25 years and have been 7 years a citizen of the United States. Now, I had the good fortune last year to accompany a congressional candidate to the Secretary of State's office when he turned in his papers to the signatures to get on the ballot. And in that process, you turn in your signatures. And that's it, you turn in your signatures. I have worked with dozens and dozens of candidates for the legislature over the last 7 years. And I've asked, I'd say, somewhere in the area of at least 2 dozen, maybe close to 3 dozen at this point, how many were asked of their citizen status, and not a single one of them. You all have been elected, you've all turned in, House members have turned in their 25 signatures and signed the paper. So the point of this bill is to require the Secretary of State to inquire of the prospective candidates their actual citizen status.
To carry your argument out, all of us have not been constitutionally elected to office, nor have our predecessors.
No, I think you're looking at it from, no, I don't think you're looking at it the way, the intent there isn't to question your validity of office.
I don't feel personal threatened.
I didn't have you in mind when I spoke.
Having been my seatmate for a couple of years, I appreciate that.
I just like to, my worldview says that we don't cause our brothers to stumble. And I'd rather not have to go through any other possibility in the future. If we can verify somebody's citizenship status right at the gate, right out of the gate.
And there's a certain irony about LD 34 in that it represents sort of an effort that's rooted in an extremist, and I want to emphasize this because it's the reality of why we're having this kind of discussion. An extremist claim aimed at America's first African-American president. You've seen the headlines, you've read about it, you all know about it. And as myself, I'm an American of Mexican descent, and I have a sense of history, and LULAC has a sense of history, and I can tell you that more Latinos were lynched during the Civil War than African Americans. And some of you have ancestors, and I think some of you kind of echoed that in your comments and your questions, that your ancestors were probably a part of the list of those, along with Mexican Americans, along with dogs that were denied access to public facilities.
Some of the comments you made in your testimony, as far as and some of the verbal piece about the racism.
I didn't make any statement about the racism. I said that the bill has an origin that's very disturbing. It's rooted in history. It's racial in effect.
As far as the extremist claim aimed at America's first African-American president,
Yeah.
I would caution you that normally as representatives we we try not to offend the sponsors and co-sponsors of bills, just out of courtesy.
Well, if that was the case, I apologize, because that wasn't the intent.
This has absolutely nothing to do with the ridiculous birther controversy and all that, as some liberal media types would try and have you believe. This does not do anything, in my personal opinion, as I understand the law, with the presidential election and the president being a citizen or not. Has absolutely nothing to do with that, because the way I interpret the law, and I may be wrong, and I'm sure those of you who are attorneys would probably know better than I do, but we elect electors for the presidency. We don't elect the president directly. So this bill directly deals with the candidates in Maine, House, Senate, our congressional candidates, our senatorial, U.S. Congress, U.S. Senate candidates. And that's why I've put the bill in.
This is very concerning to me as a voter. I'm very involved, and I want to know any candidate that is on that ballot is valid. I don't want to be hoodwinked. I want to know when they say it's a birth certificate, that it did mean the vital records issues 4 plus or minus different types of birth certificates. Which one would be sufficient? But as a voter, and as my right to vote, that the candidate that's on that ballot has been certified to be on that ballot in any capacity. If it's the local dog catcher, the local area that takes the petition, the town clerk can even verify it. And if you are a candidate and put yourself in the public, your documents would be at the town level or even at the state registrar level, that they would in fact, if they were to be leaked to some agency, it'd be very clear where that leak came from. And so I have the problem I have with the bill for not being for it is that it says specifically a birth certificate. Well, what does that mean, a birth certificate? I can say I am Debbie Berry. I have 2 parents that were born in the state of Maine, but that doesn't say my doctor. It doesn't say the hospital I was born in. So if I were in a challenge period, someone would say, well, where is the hospital you were born at? Who was your doctor? Who was the attending nurse? What happened to your twin? These are questions that need to be answered that as a voter. And also, I'm also a retired warrant officer. It is very infuriating to me that they would put this type of very small type of language down. If they're going to do this, do it the right way, all the way through. That's all I have.
You know what the Constitution says, and now they're just complying with it, providing proof.
Yeah, I never thought of the word compliance, but yeah, I think that's a good assessment of what the bill would do.
Okay, and because we're in tight fiscal times, and I'm cheap, lack of a term here, you just got to ask this question here. Currently, under the system, we sign the affidavits. If there were an issue and someone's citizenship were challenged, it seems that, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but the Secretary of State would then have the obligation of doing the research and conducting all this. If someone provides their citizenship up front, then it seems like we would alleviate any sort of possible fiscal impact on the Secretary of State's office. That'd be fair.
I believe you're correct in that statement. I did receive, I don't know if the members of the committee received in their packet, but I did receive a fiscal note, and there is no fiscal note.
For this legislation.
For this legislation.
But if they had to prove...
They would prevent... Yeah, I'm sure there would be an expense, a fiscal piece to it, where you do it on the back end.
Having fought an affidavit before and its validity, I find it's easier to have proof than it is an affidavit, and they're not necessarily the same equal weight. That's why I just had to ask the question. Thank you.
Good morning, Representative Seabra. Always lovely to see you. There must be something out in the water out in the western part of the state. Representative Crockett and I grew up in the same area. I'm cheap too. So the question I just have comes down to, I understand the cost associated with the Secretary of State's office regarding, and this is something I'd love to have for the work session, but it's hard to ask it at the work session, I'm sorry. It's really expensive, or they say that they can assume the cost, but Representative Crockett's point was that it's expensive for the Secretary of State, staff time, et cetera, to go through and and to do the due diligence that when there's a challenge, if there's a challenge, which we haven't yet assumed there was. I guess the question I have is regarding the municipal clerks. You know, I think Representative Longstaff brought up an interesting point. I've been through the immigration process, not for myself, but it's complicated, and there are there are like tons of different classifications, and there are tons of different documents that can be produced, and I just, you know, I think it's easier for the Secretary of State maybe to go through that. I'm just questioning what would be involved in training the municipal clerks as to what documentation is actually considered proof, and do you know what I'm saying?
I believe, yeah, no, I do. I like your question.
It's
no, I think,
you know, that
as far as I know, it would be a determination on the certification side of the process on the Secretary of State side, not on the town clerk's side.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but when I go to I go to the town clerk.
The town clerk needs to verify that say on your paperwork, the 25 signatures, they need to verify that the person's on the voting list, and then they verify that the candidate is on the voting list.
Is it more time intensive for the Secretary of State's office to check proof every time or for every candidate than to review the challenge at a time when it's appropriate?
I've definitely asked and have that for the
Yeah, that would be very helpful. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
What the Secretary of State's office supports this because what we're talking about is the most fundamental, cherished right that we have in this country. There are men and women who have fought and died for this. What we're talking about is one additional step. Currently, you buy a hunting license in the state of Maine, you have to show identification. If you are you're born after January 1st, 1960, you have to register for the Selective Service. Now, I don't know if there is a huge problem in people not registering for the Selective Service, but I do know if they don't register for the Selective Service, they can't get student loans, they can't get a federal job. There are penalties associated with that. And in reference to, has there been a dearth of people trying to run for office who are not citizens? Obviously, the answer to that is no. But recently, as a case in point, the Transportation Security Administration in this country has said that since they've gone into effect, since they have been checking identification at airports, they have not found one terrorist. They've not found one terrorist. I don't think there are a lot of people who mind the Transportation Security Administration checking to see if they, in fact, are eligible to fly. What we're talking about here is when candidates file their petitions at the Secretary of State's office, they show the proof of citizenship. It will take about 2 seconds before they hand in all the papers anyway. They have to sign something. It does amplify what's in the Constitution. It's very easy. And like I said, I think in this particular case, when for everyday licenses, we put people through hoops to get far lesser things than our right to vote. Simply, as Representative Crockett mentioned, offering compliance on this, the Secretary's office doesn't see any problem with that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And from a public policy perspective, again, given the contributions of immigrants to our nation and our economy, the legislature should reject any proposal like this one, which can be an empty vehicle for anti-immigrant rhetoric. I think that's a lot of what Dr. Carmona was referring to earlier. We just believe, again, that the oaths required under the Maine citizenship should suffice as a requirement. Any accusations about someone lying under oath about their citizenship are really, as has been said, accusations about fraud and can be handled appropriately. There have been, again, no allegations in Maine, at least not publicly, that any recent candidate for office has lacked this requirement. And the bill cites no rationale for a change in the law and points to no instances of fraud. Just to comment on a couple of things that have been said earlier. One comment was made that it's easier to do this on the front end, but when this has never been an issue ever, why create more bureaucratic hurdles on the front end to solve a problem that doesn't exist? Additionally, there's been a lot of talk about the value placed on the right to vote and the right to run for office, and those are all extremely laudable values and ones that we should and do respect in the state of Maine. However, one of the things that we also really respect in the state of Maine is to be free from unwarranted, unnecessary governmental intrusion. And what I believe that this bill does is just simply do that. It adds one more layer of bureaucratic governmental intrusion in a place where there's no need for such a thing to be done.
If you want the best of Maine, national, and world news updated 3 to 4 times a day, go to www.MaineWebNews.com and make it your homepage.